mistakes happen. We know that when we're dealing with developmental players, the mistakes are going to happen during games. Even dealing with professional players, mistakes still happen during games. So the key is, how do we as coaches respond to the mistakes? How do the teammates respond to the mistakes? And how does the individual respond to his or her mistake? So this past weekend I was refereeing a soccer game, and a player was dribbling toward goal, and he chose to pass to his left instead of his right. The other team stole the ball, and immediately the player who was to his right screamed at the passer, just flat out screamed at him, carried on, jumped up and down, had a little mini, 4 or 5 second tantrum. And after he was done having his tantrum, then the coach yelled at the passer as well and told him, you got to make sure that you see, Ollie running, overlapping to the right, and got on him. And from that point forward, the passer just stopped playing hard. And the coach on the sideline kept commenting and saying, why isn't he playing hard? Why isn't he going after the ball? Why did he stop running? For the rest of the half, he kept asking the bench these questions. And I don't think he must have missed the player yelling at the other player, and must not have understood that his reaction to the mistake just added to the player's frustration from being yelled at by a teammate. That's the only explanation that I have for him not understanding the behavior of the player, because from my vantage point, having seen and heard all of it, it's not that I condone the player's behavior, kind of quitting to an extent because he got yelled at by a teammate, but I certainly understood what caused that behavior and what the player was reacting to in that situation. So, a few lessons. One, as a coach, we certainly need to be aware of how players are interacting with each other. And that's one of the main things that we need to do as coaches, is make sure that we are working together as a team, and there isn't kind of the negative comments and teasing type behaviors going back and forth that can rip a team apart. And so that's one of the big things, is kind of being in tune with what the players are saying to each other. And obviously sometimes conversations are going to happen that the coach isn't there for, or there's going to be words said that the coach can't quite hear because he's out of range, things like that. But when a tantrum like that happens during a game, to me it's something that the coach has to deal with, and make sure to kind of take care of that situation and kind of put the tantruming player in his place, and make sure to build up the player who was being yelled at. So something like this, where a player essentially quits playing, doesn't happen during the game. And then the second part of that is the coach then has to be aware of his communication with that player, and especially when a player is already yelled at, his teammate, the coach adding to that just makes it worse, because it essentially justifies the player who yelled at the teammate, because the coach doesn't admonish the player who had a tantrum, and instead he essentially says the same thing to the player who made the mistake. So now that player who made the mistake, he knew he made a mistake, because his body language dropped as he made the pass to the wrong player, and then he gets yelled at, and then he gets yelled at again, and then he stops playing. So again, it's basically a double whammy for that player, getting yelled at by his teammate and then getting yelled at by a coach. So these are things that, as we coach and as we gain experience, we really need to be aware of the dynamics between players, and then how our behavior towards players, especially when they're making mistakes, how that affects them in the moment and then over the long term. In this situation, the player who made the mistake looked like he could be the youngest player on the team. It was under 14 boys, I think, and he looked substantially, in terms of his physical development, he looked substantially younger than most of the players on the field. So potentially he could be a year or two younger. So even though he was a fairly skilled player, he may not be as emotionally or socially developed as some of the other players. again, I don't know that. Just looking at the players and what happened, I'm kind of creating a narrative to tell the story. But that obviously is a possibility when you see a player who's much less physically developed. He could be of a younger age, whether chronological or biological or both. And so maybe not as socially or emotionally developed, and so he can't handle the same type of feedback, negative feedback from a coach that maybe another player who's a little bit older and maybe he's been around a little bit longer might be able to handle that type of feedback from that coach. So again, understand the dynamics of the individual player and the interpersonal dynamics between teammates, and then also how our communication affects players, especially when it happens in conjunction with comments by other team members at the same time. All these things are things that we need to learn and be aware of as we coach and really try to develop players, keep players motivated, keep players playing hard, and keep a positive environment for the young players.